Support for this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is brought to you by MX Publishing, with the largest catalog of new Sherlock Holmes books in the world. New novels, biographies, graphic novels, and short story collections about Sherlock Holmes. Find them at mxpublishing.com.
And by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com.
And by Dan Andriaco's latest Sebastian McCabe, Jeff Cody series. The latest title, No Ghosts Need Apply, is now available. Find out more at danandriaco.com.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
Well, hello once again, and welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, are you ready to be boxed in?
I'm ready to be boxed, stamped, posted, mailed, find myself at the lost letter office, all those things.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, you seem to be the kind of guy who constantly thinks outside of the box.
I do think outside of the box. And in fact, I had the box around here somewhere. It's, my fear is it was recycled. I think I put it in the recycling.
Oh. Well, my hope here is that whether we can find the box or not, we will have what I would call Schrodinger's Sherlockian relics. You don't know whether they're inside the box or outside the box at any given moment. Well,
if you observe them, that's sort of if you measure them, somebody looks at them.
Let me ask you this. Do they exist if you see them but don't observe them?
That's a very Watsonian possibility. I like that. If you see, I think from a Heideggerian standpoint, I think you'd have to say they're in the realm of the corporeal. But I'll tell you, that means that if you just had a box and you could imagine a whole series of objects in them and you never opened the box, you would still have, I guess you'd have a box that you hadn't opened.
I like that. Well, imagine the possibilities of such an evidence box.
Yeah. Or I wonder now if you had dinner with Schrodinger and you got the bill, but never opened the folder the bill came in to look at it. Could you then in good conscience leave him with it?
And really, what's the tip on that then? Oh, the philosophizing could keep on going. And before we actually delve into the philosopher's song, I'm going to go to our housekeeping here. The show notes for this episode are available at ihose.co/ihose225. You're going to make sure to want to visit that because we will have additional links for you to check out, as well as some actual photographic evidence of what we're talking about in today's show. While you're there, of course, you can sign up to be notified via email whenever we make an update on the site. We do some text updates as well as audio updates, and we've got all kinds of ways to connect with us there, including the email address for what you need to do to participate in this episode's quiz, the Canonical Couplets quiz. We will have that after the interview, so stay tuned for an item out of the iHose vaults. After retiring from the Maryland School for the Deaf, Deborah Clark worked part-time for Goucher College in Towson, Maryland, as an adjunct professor of special education and as a coach for student teachers for 6 years. She spent the last few years traveling and visiting friends and family, as well as doing some volunteer work with the local hospital and enjoying Sherlockian activities. Deborah's Sherlockian history includes being the first female member of the Six Napoleons of Baltimore and originating the name from the Scintillation of Scions gathering. Debbie, welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Thank you.
So why don't you take us back, way back, and let everyone know how you first got acquainted with Sherlock Holmes?
Well, I've always been interested in mysteries, but I think my first formal introduction to Sherlock was 7th grade English class. Our English teacher used to read us probably the abridged version of the stories once a week. It was part of a certain kind of curriculum, I expect, and I got hooked. Soon thereafter, I discovered my friend's dad had a complete set, and I read them all. And I discovered our local library had a copy of The Misadventures of Sherlock Holmes on their used book table for sale, so I bought that and got into the broader Sherlockian world. And that was reignited when I found a copy of The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes by Baring Gould in my teens, and again with the 7% Solution when that came out. And then I came upon a listing in one of the community continuing ed brochures that a guy called Paul Churchill was offering a continuing ed class on Sherlock Holmes, which included a visit to the Sherlock Holmes Museum. Well, I knew enough by that time to know that there isn't a Sherlock Holmes Museum, at least not a public one, in Maryland that I knew of, so I signed up. And lo and behold, there is a Sherlock Holmes Museum in Maryland, and it was called Paul Churchill's Living Room. In fact, and dining room. So that, and of course, through Paul, I got into Watson's Tin Box of Ellicott City, which is my home scion.
Wow.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, I guess so. Wow. That's a lot to unpack there, Debbie. I'm particularly fascinated that you discovered and devoured the misadventures of Sherlock Holmes so early on in your association with the character. I mean, this is a set of pastiches that was edited by Ellery Queen.
Right.
Put out in 1944. Of course, there's this famous trilogy dinner where 3 books were launched at a dinner in March of 1944, and The Misadventures of Sherlock Holmes was one of them. And as further background, the Conan Doyle boys, Adrian and Dennis, were none too pleased with this particular tome because they felt that it ripped off their father's character, and let's just put it frankly, they weren't making any money off of it. That I think was the real crime.
Yeah, I understand that now. I didn't then.
So what did you think? I mean, when you read this second volume, this book of pastiches, did you at that young age view it as simply an extension of what we know as the canon? Did you view it as something that was outside of the norm? What were your perceptions?
That's a good question. I thought of it as sort of outside the norm. I didn't much care for the parodies. I mean, like most people who finish the Conan Doyle canon, I just wanted more stories. So I was more interested in the pastiches. even though some, of course, were better than others, and I liked some better than others. But I was just intrigued that there were more out there.
And when you mentioned, speaking of out there, that you saw this mention of the Sherlock Holmes Museum, was this your first encounter with what we commonly refer to as Sherlockians?
No. A year or two before that, I guess, I was an avid reader of the old mystery magazine, which was like an Ellery Queen magazine format. And they had in the back a Sherlock Holmes convention in San Francisco. And I thought, that's really interesting. I never heard of that. So I wrote to the contact person, and she wrote back the exact right words. Come if you can, if unavailable, come all the same. And I thought, these are my people. So I took an airplane by myself to San Francisco to the airport hotel, and that was my first experience with other major Sherlockian groups and the Great Game and so forth. And I'm trying to think who was the guest person. I don't remember. Somebody who actually knew Conan Doyle was there, and that was kind of exciting.
Wow.
Also, the vendors, were really interesting. I picked up a couple of related source books and things I didn't really know about. I picked up a Baedeker's Of the Right Year and thought, this is really cool. This, for the final problem and the empty house, this is very cool for Switzerland. So that was my first experience, I guess. And I met some people and went back to San Francisco to my first John Bennett Shaw workshop a couple years after that. And later I ran into Paul. Actually, John Bennett Shaw put me in touch with Peter Blau, and I think I went to one Red Circle, but was unable to go to hardly any others because they were always on a Friday night, and I'm a teacher. By Friday, I'm dead. But Paul's was the first group I could actually get to more often than not.
Interesting. And in those first meetings, how did your interests collide? I mean, are you a collector? Did you start to collect things? Were you just interested in reading? Meeting Peter, meeting John Bennett Shaw, Shaw Conference, you're really in on the deep end now.
Yeah. And all of that. I do have, I should say, a collection. It's not terribly valuable, but it means a lot to me. And at the moment, it's taking over my spare bedroom. And I just really liked being with those people because they talk my language. And it was just enjoying everything about it. But I must say that Paul took it to another level with his level of collecting, because he collected realia, and if he couldn't find it, he would often make it.
Right. Now, is that when you first visited his Sherlock Holmes Museum there in Maryland, was he always, sort of manufacturing, gathering, collecting artifacts related to the stories, or did that come later?
No, by the time I met him, he had a sitting room in his living room. He had the fireplace. He had the knife in the fireplace, mantle. He had dottles. He had I think he had and he had I think he had a whole Rudge Whitmore bicycle, I think. I know he had full dresses. He had a wedding dress for the woman in
Hattie Duran.
Hattie Duran.
Thank you very much. Yes, exactly.
From The Noble Bachelor, yeah.
That's right. He had a cassock from a priest from The Final Problem. He has a blue dress from Copper Beaches. He has a tiara. He had just a lot of stuff.
Go ahead.
He was well into his collecting mode by the time I met him.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So what did you think when you walked into his home and saw this vast array of collectibles?
Wow. I think some of the most obvious ones were little shadow boxes of the sitting room and Sherlock Holmes' bedroom. And then he had a live taxidermed cobra with a mongoose on the sideboard next to the gasogene.
Teddy.
So it's overwhelming.
Wow.
But he had an entire wall of evidence boxes. As he come in the door, there they were, and then to the right side was the rest of his living room.
So talk to us a little bit about evidence boxes. What were these, and what did Paul do with them?
Okay, Paul said that when he joined or started his first Sherlock Holmes Society, that he was lousy at quizzes. Now, Steve Clarkson was making up the quizzes, and Steve was an incredible quiz maker, so these were not easy. But Paul felt like his memory wasn't that good, and that if he had or made objects that would be from the story, that he would call an evidence box. He was inspired by the Simon Goodenow, I think, Sherlock Holmes file initially, that it would help his quiz-taking score. So he started out doing that and kept going. And he would update or replace if he found something better, too. So it took off. And I think his wife had given him a 7% solution early on. And I think he started doing this after she died.
The book, not the actual drug, right?
Correct. That's correct. Yes, thank you for
well, look,
qualifying that.
You give somebody a 7% solution, and boy, that'll motivate them, sure.
Absolutely.
So this became something of a hobby, of an affectation for him.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was his major hobby.
That's wonderful. Well, we are going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back with Debbie Clark, we will be continuing to talk about evidence boxes. Stay tuned. Well, you may recall us speaking to playwright David McGregor here on episode 140. The good news is our friends at MX Publishing now have some of David McGregor's work in stock. 3 new books by David McGregor, including Sherlock in Love, the Holmes Adler Mysteries. These are a triptych of plays that first appeared at the Purple Rose Theater in Chelsea, Michigan. The Adventure of the Elusive Ear, The Adventure of the Fallen Soufflé, and The Adventure of the Ghost Machine. All 3 are creative and bring Holmes into contact with other people whom you may have heard of, including Vincent van Gogh, Auguste Escoffier, and Tesla and Edison. Adding to the other group of books is David's 2-volume series, Sherlock Holmes, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. In these books, David takes us on a journey through the late 1800s, early 1900s, through the end of the 20th century and into the 21st, as Sherlock Holmes has been played by so many different actors and was brought to life by so many different forces. David takes us through these various times and introduces us to names that you may be familiar with and names that may be new to you. All three of these books are available at mxpublishing.com today. All right, we are back, and we just got into Paul Churchill's abode and some of his collectibles, and Debbie was telling us about evidence boxes. Now, how many of these evidence boxes did Paul create?
Over 60, and I say that because there are 60 stories, of course, but some of the evidence boxes have 2 or 3 boxes to them. For example, The Final Problem has Dr. Watson's medical bag with some stuff in it, and then there's a whole separate box. Most of the boxes are the sides of the photograph boxes you can get in Target or Michael's or something.
Sure,
yeah.
Sure.
But there's others that are in various containers. There's one in what looks like the case you would put a crown in, and that's for the Musgrave ritual. And some are cigar boxes. One is a Prince Albert cigar box. So there must have been a mention of Prince Albert in that story.
Sure.
They come in all shapes and sizes. Some of them are huge. Some of them are like a storage box, a 2x3 storage box. And that's probably one of the novels. But the rest are in assorted size photograph and other boxes. So there's 60 plus.
Wow. And Paul kept all of these at his home, out on display?
They were in a bookcase to the left that took up the whole wall to the left of his front door. and it's the larger ones sort of around the edges. But yeah, he kept them all there. And right now they're in my house.
So I want to get back to some of the contents a little bit, but talk about that. How did they come into your possession after Paul had them for so many years?
When Paul got sick, he was very worried about what would happen to the boxes. His wish was that they would stay with Watson's tin box, but he didn't know how that would happen. And as a sort of a throwaway line, I said, well, I got a whole wall with a bookcase on it, and it probably would fit those if that's what you really want to do. Well, as it turned out, he left them to his oldest son, and a week or so after Paul's funeral, he called me up and said, "Did you mean what you said?" And I said, well, if that's what you would like to do, yes, I would be happy to be the caretaker of these 4 Watson's tin box. And what we did at that point was 4 or 5 of us from Watson's tin box went to Paul's house and inventoried, pad and paper, what was in everything.
Wow.
And then I made a number of trips to my house and took all the stuff out of my bookcases and put his stuff in. And what Paul did and what I do is I take a box to Watson's Tin Box meetings every month and share the contents of those. So whatever the story is of the month, that's the box I take. And other people are allowed to take them also if they sign them out and make a pledge with blood that they will bring them back intact. And they have. They've been to the Red Circle. They've been to the 6 Napoleons of Baltimore. I should mention that Paul and Denny Dobry had a really good relationship, and they used to share objects. If Denny found something or made something that he thought was really cool, he would give one to Paul, and vice versa. So Denny was also very helpful in helping keep all this together.
Yeah, and I should mention that Denny Dobry was our guest, well, a couple of times, but he was on episode 153 of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we talked about his recreation of 221B Baker Street in his basement in Reading, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
You are there. Absolutely there.
Oh. So, tell us, Debbie, a little bit about Watson's Tin Box. I take it this is the local Sherlockian Society. When was it formed and why?
Okay, I don't actually remember when, but certainly before my time, Paul Churchill was getting interested in Sherlockiana and Sherlock Holmes, and he wanted to get together with other people who were interested. And one of his school colleagues, Rod McCaslin, was interested. And one of Paul's students, the daughter of Steve Clarkson, was in Paul's class and said, well, my dad's real interested in that. So the three of them got together, and Steve sort of mentored them into how to do a society and so forth. And they came up with the name of Watson's Tin Box of Ellicott City, Maryland. And it started to grow. And I think there were maybe 6 or 7 people initially. And by the time I joined, there were 20-something easily. And it's a monthly meeting at a restaurant. And we do what most other scions do, have a meal, talk about the story. We have a learned quiz, a learned topic speaker or presentation, and we have a quiz for prizes, and we show the evidence box. Usually that's before the quiz because it's a good crib sheet. So it's been going, let's see, I probably joined in the 80s. It's probably been going since into the 70s.
Wow.
And we now serve most of mid-Maryland, unlike the Six Napoleons, that's more Baltimore-based.
Okay. And how many members do you have now? Ish.
I'd say they don't all come to all the meetings, but I'd say 50-ish, maybe more. We do tend to have large meetings these days. It's when we have meetings. It can be 30 plus on any given Monday.
Wow.
And people come from all over the place if they're in the area. And
have you been continuing the tradition even during the pandemic?
Yes, we've been on Zoom every month, and I show the evidence box on Zoom every month. So yeah, we had a meeting just last night.
Oh. And that's intriguing to me because on the one hand, you're not getting to handle, to feel, to, really have that tactile experience with the items in the evidence box. And yet you can be certain that it will be a more thorough going through, that, with scattered attention in restaurants and side chatting and everything, people might miss things. What's your experience been in terms of people's engagement with the evidence boxes virtually versus personally in real life? They haven't actually said, but they keep asking me to do it, so I suppose it's going okay. I tend to agree with you that the best part of the evidence boxes is getting to look at and feel and hold and read the stuff, because Paul would
he would not only create a letter, for example, I just looked at a letter that he had created theoretically from Irene Adler's lover, Wilhelm Gotteslieb, et cetera, with a very florid design, and inside it's, "My dear Irene, I long for your," and it goes on. And the Temptation or book of Baron Gruner, he's got old photographs in there and little descriptions of the ladies. And I mean, you can imagine that, but it's one thing to look at it. So, as I say, whatever Paul couldn't find, he could make. And I think his investiture, although Corot is certainly a really good one, could have easily been somebody, the forger, because he did that. But he was also a philatelist and a coin collector. So if he has actual Victoria stamps on the letters, and he has created little postmarks, and he has created the Legion of Honor form with the stamps on it and so forth. And seeing all that stuff up close and personal is excellent. But I have had numerous people say that their favorite part of our meetings is the evidence box.
And what about the contents of the evidence box, Deb? Are the contents fixed, or do people, even now after Paul's passing, come up with things that might be added or replaced or improved? Or
well, we have had to replace the snake skin from the speckled man. It just doesn't hold up after 100 years. And
after 100 meetings. I mean,
yeah,
boy.
that too. Yeah. Yes, we've had somebody bring us a plane tree leaf from Britain because we don't have the same variety here. My favorite edition, and they have been rare, but my favorite edition is from Shannon Carlisle's class, who has a Sherlock Holmes club in Tennessee. They decided that our evidence box was missing Mr. Henry Baker's walking stick. And they were absolutely right. And they wrote a little essay about why this was really important and it should be there. And I read their letter to the group. The group agreed, and we added Mr. Henry Baker's walking stick and gave them all honorary Lexington Blocks membership for their efforts.
Now, how does one fit a walking stick into a box?
You don't. I have a walking stick, a harpoon, Sherlock Holmes' walking stick from The Final Problem. I have a whole lot of stuff that doesn't fit. It's in a corner right now.
You must be fun walking into restaurants with some of that stuff.
Yeah, happily, yeah. The walking stick, thankfully, collapses into three pieces. The harpoon, I sort of keep that covered. And we used to meet at O'Houlihan's in Columbia, Maryland, which is sort of in the middle of the state and not too far from Ellicott City. Unfortunately, that restaurant closed with the pandemic, so we are currently homeless, and hopefully are going to be auditioning restaurants to attend when the pandemic lets up a little more.
Well, if there's any restaurant in the mid-Maryland area that has room for a harpoon and calamari on the menu, I'm sure Watson's Tin Box would love to hear from you. So, as you've handled, I mean, Paul's been gone for what, about 15 years or more now?
10, I think.
10? Okay. Well, as you've handled these evidence boxes for the last decade or more,
and brought them to and from meetings or pulled them out for your Zoom calls. I have to imagine that you probably have a favorite box.
I can't say that. I like bits and pieces of all of them, frankly. I like some of the paper stuff that Paul has created. I think the Naval Treaty is remarkable. I think...
is it written in French?
Yeah, it is.
Holy cow.
Yeah, it is. And has all the little seals and ribbons and stuff that you would imagine. The Musgrave Ritual one is likewise quite nice. I really like the Legion of Honor one that is from The Final Problem. I like the little box with the needle, the dying detective.
Right.
That's very clever. I like that a lot. So there's bits of all of them that I like. There's a couple of the stories that aren't real grabbers, don't have a lot in them. So, like the Engineer's Thumb doesn't have a lot in it. However, it does have the thumb in alcohol.
Do you have the mask that little Lucy wore and the yellow face?
Yes.
Oh, look at that.
Yep. I have a cataract knife from the Silver Blaze. The only thing I don't have is like great big things like a whole bicycle. And I do have a piece of various tires, Dunlop and Rudge Whitworth and that sort of thing. And I have the only thing I didn't bring home because it just really creeped me out was the effigy of Holmes with the bullet hole in his head from the empty house. That was just too creepy.
You've heard them on here before, and now they are back. It is the Sebastian McCabe, Jeff Cody Mystery Series by Dan Andriacco. You've heard of the novels No Police Like Holmes, Holmes Sweet Holmes, the 1895 Murder, and more. Well, they're back on September 28th with the latest title, No Ghosts Need Apply. Sherlock Holmes, of course, said to Dr. Watson, the world is big enough for us, no ghosts need apply. But McCabe and Cody, well, they don't have a choice when a popular reality TV show comes to their native Erin, Ohio, to record a Halloween special about some entity that's disturbing the local gastropub known as the Speakeasy. What was expected to be some fun publicity for the pub turns into a nightmare after someone is shot to death one night in the same place and in the same way as Jackie O'Brien almost 100 years earlier. The police chief recognizes this is Mac and Jeff's kind of case, but they're forced to become virtual sleuths for most of the time when the restaurant and most businesses are shut down because of COVID. Before he solves the murder and a second homicide, Mac makes an embarrassing blunder in one lesser case and scores a great triumph in another. Make sure you check out No Ghosts Need Apply by Dan Andriacco at danandriacco.com today.
And how about stories like the Priory School? Do you have horseshoes that have a cow foot bottom on them? And
yeah,
it's wonderful. And where do you dock the bark Aurora? Where do you?
Happily, I have a miniature.
There we go.
Okay, good.
There we go.
Yeah,
Steam launch Aurora, I should.
Yes. Yeah.
So what happened to that wax effigy of Holmes in Paul's collection?
I don't know.
Well, it gets hot in Maryland, I think.
It does.
It's out there somewhere, hunting for a home.
No,
It might. I don't think
often,
so.
I think, and ran away.
It could have. It was left with Paul's daughter-in-law and her husband, and I don't really know what happened to it.
It merged with the Yankee Candle Factory.
Probably.
So, Debbie, when you introduce people to these evidence boxes, what do you find is the most requested item or the most requested box that people want to see?
Usually the ones they're most familiar with, like the Red-Headed League or the Scandal in Bohemia or the Speckled Band. But then, then people have personal favorites.
Is there anything in these boxes that tends to surprise people?
Well, yeah, the thumb from the engineer's thumb and the ear from
The cardboard
Cushing
box.
sister.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, the Cushings. Yeah, and I must admit they are pretty surprising because they look really real.
Well, they're preserved in salt, of course.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. So, we have pictures of some of these to share with our fans, and those will be available in the show notes. So make sure you take a look at those. I remember Paul coming up to Boston years ago to a Speckled Band meeting and bringing one of his evidence boxes up there. And I was astounded by the detail, by the realism. As you look at some of these things, have you ever, because obviously we're doing this all in fun, these weren't actual items that were claimed from the canon, but have you perceived of any inaccuracies in any of them? Or has anyone else pointed them out, if there are any?
Occasionally, but I can't remember what they are right now. I do know that people are amazed at how good they are. That really gets them. They're pretty astounding.
They are. I mean, I was always impressed with Paul's presentation myself. And look, when we go to these events, we're accustomed to seeing more common things like a shilling. Right? You see an actual Victorian shilling. Okay, that's fine. Everybody that gets invested into the Baker Street Irregulars gets an actual shilling affixed to their certificate. But with Paul's executions here of the evidence boxes, I mean, it goes so many levels beyond that where you didn't even think it was possible.
Oh, right. And he used to talk about, and it's true, he would go into an antique store before we had the internet and wander around and come back with stuff like a schoolboy's cap that he would then embroider or affix something to in the right colors that was mentioned in the Priory School. Or he would come back with, let's say, a jockey silk that happened to be the right colors for the silver blaze. I mean, it's just amazing. He sort of had an ESP for that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you think about having to be aware when you go into a store or a shop, and having to know the canon backward and forward, and inside and out. I mean, the level of detail that Paul goes to, it really. I guess we have Steve Clarkson to thank for that and his evil quizzes, making Paul pay attention to that level of detail.
Yes. And then Paul was quizmaster after Steve, and he was not quite as evil, but he loved puns, as you probably well know. And so he loved to draw, so he would make little cartoons around the edge of the quiz paper, and some of them were puns, and they were all related to the quiz he had on the paper, but it was just kind of fun to figure out what all that was. Another level of hint.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking for the detective, the treasure hunter in all of us, I suppose.
It's fabulous, and it's sort of eternal. You know, people feel a very deep connection to some of these stories. You know, we see it with people who enjoy cosplay and things like that, but it's an enormous amount of fun. I wonder, is there anywhere an inventory? Has anybody ever typed up a list, you know, what's in each evidence box?
Yeah.
Because it would be a great challenge, you know, for our listeners to begin to create these kinds of evidence boxes themselves. And my memory of them is the boxes themselves were really quite beautiful. You know, you used to be able to find in antique shops printers' type drawers, you know, which had small compartments for obviously for each letter. Well, in the same way, Paul designed the evidence boxes, as I remember, you know, with many compartments. So it's not just a box of things rattling around in it. It's a real display.
Some of them are real displays, and sadly, some of them are boxes with things rattling around in them. It runs the gamut.
I guess those he kept at home,
Yeah, but yes, there is an inventory, and it is the hope of Watson's Tin Box at some future date after the pandemic is lessened to get all this online so that people can see them, not just us, but that they could go on a website and pull up, here's a Gasogene, here's a Tantalus, here's Sherlock Holmes' gold watch with the pound that Irene Adler gave him, and see things for themselves.
And there you will have that Sherlock Holmes Museum in Maryland.
Yes, that's right.
Available to people worldwide. Well, we will look forward to that day, Debbie. And if there is any help that our listeners can give, I'm sure we can put them in touch with you, whether it's helping construct some boxes, helping with the digitization of the archive. I'm sure folks would love to lend a hand.
Yeah, it's digitized as we speak, but we're trying to work with a university to get it up and running with them.
Oh, superb.
Yeah.
Well, we wish you the best of luck in all of that, and hope that the evidence boxes are available for years to come for many, many generations of Sherlockians.
Me too.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for all that you do in the world of Sherlock Holmes and for sharing that love with us.
Certainly. It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I don't think a lot of our listeners may realize the connections to an interest in mystery that this conversation with Debbie and discussion about the evidence boxes points out. I mean, for example, look at the people that we've talked to over the last few months. Ross Davies with the Baker Street Almanac, the last edition of which included a replica visor very similar to the cricket cap with the white chevron that was featured in the Priory School. And then we had talked, I think, on IHO's, was it 203? I don't really remember the number, but we had Gus and Luke Holwerda with us who run the Jeremy Brett podcast, and they've issued Sherlockian relics, including the Musgrave Ritual and Radix Pedis Diaboli, the poison from the Devil's Foot, and the Blue Carbuncle. And then back in the 1930s, Dennis Wheatley had a series of books published by Hutchison in London that were reprinted in the 1980s called Who Killed Robert Prentice, The Malinsay Massacre, Murder off Miami. But these were folders of evidence as if it had been collected by the police force for some of these cases, with a lot of physical items. Telegrams folded in there, rings, bits of jewelry. If poison was involved, little arsenical tablets and things like that. And then back in the 1980s, someone also did a study in Scarlet, a Sherlock Holmes murder dossier, which has Holmes's business card and all sorts of things from the study in Scarlet case. So this is, just wanting to experience some of these stories and touch the items that are mentioned can be very attractive to folks.
Yeah, and it's funny. I've got a book. I don't know when it was published. 2007 by Duane Swierczynski. An interactive Sherlock Holmes mystery, The Crimes of Dr. Watson. Very similar to what you're talking about there with the study in Scarlet. This is actually a solvable mystery with physical clues, tactile clues here, whether it's a ticket from the theater or an arrest warrant, items you can pull out of little envelopes they have buried throughout. And then, look at this. You get toward the end there, and it looks like a patent illustration for artificial kneecaps. How about that?
That's amazing.
Yeah. And then you get to the end, and they, of course, have the solution there under a wax seal. So no temptation to break it open beforehand. But I think that's the marvel of where we are with this hobby, this intersection of the written word, of literature and reality. And you think about the exhibitions we've seen, the International Exhibition of Sherlock Holmes. We talked about that here a number of episodes ago, where you could go in and feel the clues and see things up close. Isidoro Persano and his worm unknown to science, his remarkable worm. All the way back to the Sherlock Holmes exhibition of 1951 with many of these realistic objects. And we talked about the jellyfish recently on Trifles and the snake, right, and whatnot. And these things were the basis for the Sherlock Holmes sitting room that was reconstructed in the Sherlock Holmes pub there in London. So it's this amazing intersection of the fictional and the factual, and the intertwining of them both to really make this such an experience for people.
The first Sherlock Holmes parody was probably written in 1896, The Field Bazaar, by Arthur Conan Doyle himself. He knew laughing was good for you. That's why the Wessex Press continues the tradition with The True Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Terence Faherty. It's a rare collection of Watson's early first drafts of the cases of Sherlock Holmes that will show you the truth behind the engineer's thumb and the strange insanity of General Waxbutton. Learn the actual facts behind the adventure of the notorious parasol chaser, and astonish your friends when you tell them the man with the twisted lip actually struck it big as a part-time bustle fitter. 7 of these great stories have been published in Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine, and 4 appear here for the very first time in this very first collection. Now is the perfect time for a comfortable chair and a long laugh. Get The True Adventures of Sherlock Holmes at wessexpress.com today.
All right, that's everyone's favorite quiz theme song music. That's right. It's the theme to Canonical Couplet, where we give you 2 lines of poetry and you need to feed us back what the heck it is we were talking about. We, of course, are looking for the title of one of the Sherlock Holmes stories when we give you these clues. And the last time we were here on episode 224, we gave you this clue. Holmes exhausted Palmer, and then Dunlop told him more. A forbidden, squalid inn displayed a gamecock at the door. Bert, I almost hesitate to ask, but do you know which story we're talking about?
Of course, yes. That's the Christmas story about the handyman who froze to death. It's a great story. It's called The Blue Carpenter.
Wow.
Have you been to a Wawa market? Is that where that comes from?
No, I actually have a trombone player here in the corner, and the reason for the delay there is because he passed out because that joke was so bad. He hears all the bad jokes, let me tell you.
I can imagine.
No, you were a little bit off there, Bert, just a little bit.
No.
Yeah, I know. Well, our friend Eric Deckers, of course, wrote in, as he always does, and he gave us his alternative title. He said, I've got the answer. It's the story of the 12th century monk who had a serious bronchial infection. It's the adventure of the friar's green drool. No, wait, that makes no sense, he writes. It's the adventure of the priory school. Yes, that's correct, Eric. The priory school. Well, we are going to see who else knew that and throw all of those names in the revolving drum. And we'll give the prize wheel a big spin as we look for our winner this time. Lots of people contributed. And this time it lands on 47, number 47. And that corresponds to Carol Berger. Carol, congratulations. We'll be sending you a copy of the Sherlock Holmes Scrapbook, which we mentioned was part of the Shaw 100. So look out for that, and we will be in touch with your prize. Now, this time around, we have another prize. In this case, it's going to be something from the vaults of Idaho, something three-dimensional from our own evidence box of sorts, and it will be available to the winner of this quiz. No justice for Holmes's client, nor for Hailing lost before. The fiends escape to Reading and elude the grasp of law. If you know the answer to this canonical couplet, put it in an email. Address the comment at ihearofsherlock.com with canonical couplet in the subject line. If you are among all of the correct answers and we choose your name at random, you'll win. Good luck. All right. Do you know how many tchotchkes, bits of ephemera, effluvia we have around the Idaho's vaults, Bert?
No, I don't. Do you have a sort of a microfiber mop you can use to gather them up, or?
It's going to take probably pincers, tongs, a claw, like one of those carnival claws that gets things out of the machine.
I imagine it must be very painful to go in there without wearing shoes. If you just got socks on or bare feet, and step on all those things.
There are a lot of sharp objects.
Yeah,
almost as sharp as you, my friend.
Ow.
Well, in the meantime, we will keep everyone's senses sharpened as we go into the last quarter of 2021. This is season 15. We have, just a handful of episodes left. I suppose if there are 3 months left and we do 2 episodes per month, we've got at least 8.7 episodes left to do? I was never good at math.
You didn't carry the 2.
Oh, sure. 6 more episodes for this season, for 2021. We have some wonderful guests lined up. Looking forward to talking to them. In the meantime, if you have any comments or feedback about the show, any ideas that you want us to pursue, please feel free to email us at comment@ihearofsherlock.com. In the meantime, I am the always pursuant Scott Monty.
And I am the persimmon-like Bert Wolder.
And together we say, the game's afoot.
The game's afoot.
I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck.
And believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.